Joining us now, NBC News correspondent Rehema Ellis outside of the courtroom. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard in Charlotte, North Carolina, where former President Trump will speak soon there to voters. And MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Rehema, I'm going to begin with you. What happened in this trial today, or this hearing today?
Katie, what happened here today is that the attorneys for Trump, as well as the attorneys for E. Jean Carroll, came here to argue before this three-panel judges of the appellate court. And it was about the fact that the Trump team is asking, as you so well pointed out, for this judgment against him to be thrown out, or at the very least to have that $5 million verdict against him reduced. And both teams had about 10 minutes in order to make their arguments, their presentations. And as you say, the Trump team went on to say that the information from the Access Hollywood tape should never have been entered into the trial, that information that two other women had also accused him of sexually assaulting them, similar to what happened to E. Jean Carroll. E. Jean Carroll's attorney came back and said even if all of that were thrown out of this case, that the judgment should still stand. It was very interesting that Donald Trump was here. He did not have to be here. He was not here when this case went to trial last year. He didn't spend any time here. But there was a deposition of him that was used in this case. So with all of that, E. Jean Carroll's attorney arguing that she had 11 witnesses in this case, Donald Trump's team presented none, that the time to make the argument was back then last year and not now. And so they were asking that this judgment that they got in this case should stand.
Rehema, thank you very much. Let me play a little bit from inside that hearing room today, because we don't often get audio out of these things. We got audio out of this. And this is Roberta Kaplan, who is E. Jean Carroll's lawyer, and John Sauer, who is Donald Trump's lawyer, along with the judge in this case, talking about why the judgment should stand. I'm going to warn you, though, there is some coarse language.
Mr. Trump is here today. He was given every opportunity by Judge Kaplan to show up at this trial. And he was even given till 5 p.m. on the Sunday before closings, and he didn't show. He had every opportunity to just take the stand and rebut all this evidence. He did not. He did not put on a single witness in the civil case. We put on 11. But what we did put in is this videotape of Access Hollywood, where he basically says, I grab women by the pussy, excuse my language, without their consent. And then at his deposition that I took and asked him about that video, what did he say? He embraced it.
The outcry witnesses had egregious bias against the defendant. Their prior social media posts and text messages said things totally unrelated to this case based on his politics, said that he's herpes we can't get rid of. He's compared to...
But you had an opportunity to cross-examine them in front of the jury, right?
Yes, but the question in harmless error is what harmless error is not could the jury believe it, but was the jury's judgment about that tainted by the fact that they'd also heard all this inflammatory evidence? And one thing that this court and other courts emphasize is how did the plaintiffs use it in their opening statement and their summation? And here they relentlessly hammered the propensity evidence, the Access Hollywood tape, the Leeds testimony, the Stornoff testimony. If you look at the summation...
I looked at the opening sentence, the opening statement and the summation, and I didn't see the relentless hammering that you're describing.
So that last female voice, that's the judge there. Lisa, okay, so explain, what exactly is John Sauer doing here?
John Sauer is trying to argue, Katie, that Judge Lou Kaplan, who was the judge who oversaw both Carroll trials, both let in evidence that he shouldn't have let in and excluded evidence that Trump wanted to use. For example, the fact that E. Jean Carroll never filed a police report. But the oral argument today really principally focused on two pieces of evidence. That's the testimony from Jessica Leeds, who accused Donald Trump of sexually assaulting her on a plane in the 1970s, and also that Access Hollywood tape. And he was arguing that it's what's called propensity evidence, evidence that you use to show that somebody who's done something in the past has a propensity to do that same thing again. Usually propensity evidence doesn't come into a case, except that there's a congressionally enacted federal rule of evidence that allows propensity evidence with respect to sexual assault and rape if certain circumstances are met. And today, John Sauer was arguing in very technical terms that you didn't read why Jessica Leeds' testimony, for example, should come out of the case, why the Access Hollywood tape should come out of the case as well.
And just to remind me, this is a civil case.
That's right.
So the bar is lower than a criminal court, right? Is it different?
The bar is lower in some respects, but not in others. First of all, a defamation verdict in New York State has to be unanimous. So in that respect, it shares a lot with the criminal verdict. The other thing is that the jury had to find that Donald Trump sexually abused E. Jean Carroll within the meaning of the criminal statute in New York, even though it wasn't a criminal case.
This Monica Lewinsky type dress, do you know what he's talking about?
I do know what he was talking about. There was a period of time where E. Jean Carroll, and she says in her memoir as well, that she still has the dress that she wore on the date of the assault. That dress was allegedly subjected to DNA testing. It never came into evidence, in part because there were disputes between the party about the reliability of the testing and the DNA. But that is, I think, what Donald Trump was talking about in that free associating press conference he held today.
The other bit of legal news we have is out of the hush money sentencing.
Yes.
It's been delayed now twice and delayed once again. What happened there?
Judge Juan Merchan deciding today to postpone the sentencing until after the election at Donald Trump's request. The other thing he decided is that he's going to postpone his own decision on whether to set aside the verdict because, according to Trump's lawyers, evidence admitted at the trial is now evidence that should have been excluded under the Supreme Court's immunity ruling. That decision, too, will be moved until after the election on November 12th. Now, in his decision today, he says, I'm not doing this for political reasons. If anything, I'm doing this so nobody can accuse me of interfering with the election. He said that it was important to him to avoid, and I'm quoting from his order, any appearance, however unwarranted, that the proceeding has been affected by or seeks to affect the approaching presidential election in which the defendant is a candidate.
If Donald Trump wins, what happens?
Donald Trump wins, Judge Merchan can still sentence him on November 26th. What he is going to sentence him to and whether he will serve that sentence is, I think, a different story. There's no bar on a elected president serving a sentence. There's certainly nothing in the Constitution that would preclude it. But if there's an argument to be made to the Supreme Court, I think we know from history Donald Trump's lawyers will make it.
Let's go back to what we saw a little bit earlier, Vaughn, in that news conference. And I say news conference, that's what they called it. It wasn't a news conference because he didn't take any questions from the press. Was this something that Donald Trump wanted to do? Was it the campaign involved? Why is he going out and speaking for nearly an hour about a judgment and talking about all of the allegations against himself just days before early voting starts in this country?
Right, Katie. It actually reminds me of the Trump Tower statement that he made back in June, the day after he was convicted on those 34 felony counts. You and I were standing next to each other and were keen on the opportunity to ask him questions, but he ended up not taking any that day because, let's be very clear here, Donald Trump, he is not naive to the fact that any story related to him and his legal battles has oxygen to it, and it is a story. He is not only the former president, but he's the Republican nominee for president in 2024. And so for him, he is ensuring by going out in Trump Tower outside of his elevators and speaking for almost an hour, he is ensuring that the second side of the story gets out there. And a lot of it has to frankly do with being rooted back to May of 2023. The first E. Jean Carroll defamation trial when he was found by a jury to have sexually abused her. It was a jury that made that decision, and Donald Trump didn't show up to court a single day. He chose not to testify either, as Robbie Kaplan, E. Jean Carroll's attorney, was noting there that he had the opportunity to do so, and he passed it up. And it was interesting, fast forward from May of 2023 to today, he, standing in front of those elevator doors there, was bemoaning the fact that one of his former attorneys who was working on the case at that trial at the time, Joe Tacopino, who was not notably among those attorneys standing by him today, that he had urged him to not go and testify, to not go to court, because it was below the standing of a former president of the United States to do so. And in doing part, Donald Trump, ever since then, including the day, that very day in May of 2023, that he was found to have sexually abused E. Jean Carroll by that jury, he went to a town hall in New Hampshire that night and spoke the exact words that led to the defamation finding in the very first place. And that's what you heard him continue to do today, because really it's at all costs at this point. It's not about the financial repercussions here, Katie. He has made that very clear. He is willing, despite his legal efforts to fight paying, he is willing to take this on in order to politically win. And for him, that is convincing enough Americans that E. Jean Carroll's story is not a true one.